Welcome everyone to this webinar, Mindful Education, the Science of Attention in Learning Design.
It's a pleasure to be here. I learn so much every time I hear you speak and hear Sam speak. So I'm just taking millions of notes and getting really excited about what all of this means for education, for classrooms, both traditional and virtual, and how this fits into this overall framework of how we're trying to teach differently now, especially pre and post pandemic, and how this kind of data that we've been talking about fits into that mix. As Yaki mentioned, I'm one of the co-founders of Connections Academy. So I've been thinking about different ways of teaching and learning for a really long time now. And what occurs to me is that, what's been true of the 21st century in education, and this is inside the US, but also around the world, because I think the trends that we're seeing in American schools and American thinking about education are starting to pick up in other places as well. And I think one of these is just the importance of data in general. Really, probably since No Child Left Behind days, if people don't have too much PTSD thinking about that. The idea that there's a set of data around students that can be updated regularly, that can be added to, and that will help us understand that student's profile as a learner is something I think that every educator at least aspires to wrap their arms around, even if they don't necessarily either have the data or the skill set to make perfect use of that. But this idea that data is important, that it's not just all instinct and art in teaching and learning, but that there's numbers and scales that really matter, has been a critical piece of what's made education different in this century than I think in the previous one. And then beyond academics, what I mean there is really everything that Sam just talked about. Social emotional learning as both an understanding of where a student is in terms of their mastery of those skills that Sam talked about, and as a topic of intentional instruction in and of itself. I think all of us recognize that kids having sort of a firm foundation under them from a social and emotional point of view is a really critical precondition to their ability to do academic work, and that we fool ourselves if we think that we can just focus on math and reading and not really understand where the student is coming from in terms of their ability to be present, and the ability to flourish in whatever education setting they might find themselves in. And what those two things add up together, if you go back to the prior slide just for 1 second. So I often talk about the holy grail in education being personalized learning, by which I don't necessarily mean individualized learning or self-directed learning, although that's a really important set of strategies for this. But the idea that education can be tailored to the individual student, and that in order to do that, we actually need to have information about where they are academically and where they are from an SEL point of view. And I would argue that we have not, as a sector, really paid close enough attention to attention in all of this. We've been looking at academic data, we've been looking at other kinds of SEL data, but we overlook sometimes something that we just know instinctively, which is the critical importance that attention plays in learning. So without attention, we can't take in new information. Without attention, we can't turn that information into knowledge that we can then act on. As much as Yaki's son's teacher was looking for surface signs that he was paying attention, the idea that the student needs to pay attention and that's a really critical piece, I think is something that we've overlooked in American education, partly because we haven't necessarily had the tools to know more, to do anything about it in any kind of great detail. So I am going to argue that the pandemic threw us all into a tailspin on all of the dimensions of learning and drawing on this towards personalization that we were all building up to 2020. The pandemic itself, I would argue, has kind of left students, teachers, parents, all of us with a certain amount of collective trauma that really is the result of our routines and habits being interrupted for a decently lengthy period of time. In some cases, multiple years of schools either being closed or interrupted. And we know that one of the impacts of trauma is reduced attention. It really interrupts someone's ability to focus and concentrate. And so I think we need, as educators, to pay attention to that. Regardless of how you feel about the diagnosed learning gaps, whether you see them as opportunities for acceleration or gaps that need to be remediated, I think we all basically agree that the years of the pandemic left all of our students, but in particular our most vulnerable ones, with some ground to make up in terms of their learning. And how we approach that, I'm going to argue in a minute, really needs to be much more subtle and nuanced than we've done in the past. Because part of what also comes out of the pandemic is some emerging insights about, for example, the use of technology to help tailor learning and education for individual students. The challenges that the use of technology can also add to learning situations in terms of students' ability to focus on the right things and focus on them for a sustained period of time. But if we look at all these things put together, I think we're in a place of real opportunity to get past some blind spots that we've had about attention and do better for all of our kids. So I think that we as a society and as educators have to use absolutely every single tool at our disposal to heal and make up for lost time that we lost to the pandemic. I would argue that every strategy that we have to accelerate students' learning and to expedite their healing, to get young people to the place where they're flourishing in school again, whatever that school might look like, all of those things become much more effective when we can start paying attention to attention. So what does it mean to harness the power of attention in our classrooms? I would say, first of all, that as we look at that baseline and where all of us line up against it, the four different factors that pay into attention, we're no longer looking at a world where there's normal and some outliers. Certainly there are students that will be diagnosed with ADHD, which, as we know, can be both a deficit of attention and hyperfocus, or some combination of both. But I think we can see that all of us fall across that spectrum somewhere. And for certain topics and certain learning environments, we are stronger than in others. So once we make that assumption that all of us come with baggage, all of our kids come with some differing abilities when it comes to their attention, it gives teachers the opportunity to read the room. I am imagining a situation in which a regular classroom teacher has an attention profile on all the students sitting in front of her, and can easily see when she needs to move things around, switch things up, do things differently in order to maximize attention for each of those learners, and recognizing that one size does not fit all. It's not a matter of shouting louder or forcing everyone to have eyes on them in order to get attention, but really being adaptable and creating a mesh of different environments within any learning situation that brings out the very best in every learner. That's a challenge, absolutely no question about it. I think all of us know that dealing with all of this data, even if you have really great dashboards, putting all those things together and knowing what to do with them is one of the huge challenges of teaching and learning in the 21st century. But I think it creates a huge opportunity to do even better than we might have done before. So what I'm proposing is a move towards what I just made up the term, attention-informed education, sort of like trauma-informed education or other education that's informed by other factors beyond just the reading, writing, and arithmetic. How do we create learning environments where attention is something that we're paying close attention to? And I think the first place that we need to look is at the design of our content and curriculum. As someone who's worked most deeply in online learning, that curriculum design is absolutely crucial. And yet we don't necessarily think about it from the point of view of the different and diverse learners that we have sitting in front of us. And we need to. We need to be able to adjust and adapt for students who are easily distracted and those who really want to go deeper into a particular topic. the physical classroom environment or the virtual classroom environment is something that we do have control over and can easily adjust to ensure that those who need help with some focus are sitting in a place in the classroom where they can do that, whether that's virtual or physical, and that students are working together across their different abilities so that they're bringing out the best in each other. Instructional strategies are, just like, how do you do what you're going to do? How often do you change modalities? How do you make sure that you're not boring the crap out of every learner, not just the ones who have a hard time paying attention, and really be able to draw deeply on the well of expertise that students have about their own ability to learn. And the corollary of data-armed teachers, I believe, are self-aware students. And so I'm imagining a future in which each learner is very aware of their own profile when it comes to attention, and therefore knows what it is that they need and can advocate for themselves to get that in any given learning situation in K through 12, in post-secondary education, and also in the workplace, where if we buy everything that we're being told, lifelong learning is not just a nice to have, it's a must have. And so all of us need to be aware of how we learn best, what gets in our way, and what we can do to adjust our learning environment. So I see great hope for getting past our blind spot, our collective blind spot around attention. And by focusing in and paying attention to attention, getting us all to a better place in terms of education.
Thank you very much, Miki. And Sam, can you also join us into this conversation for few more minutes?